The following program was produced by Journalism Studies, University of PNG, to mark World Press Freedom Day. Since the program was made, PNG's Constitutional Review Commission decided to shelve 3 controversial draft media laws in face of widespread public criticism. Instead, the Commission recommended that the news media regulate themselves, and the Media Council of PNG is revising accountability and complaint procedures.
The situation at Waigani as university students protest the user pay policy.
He was approached by 4 Malaysians who came up to him and said, "Oh, you're Greg Neville, you're the brother of the Minister for Forestry, Tim Neville." And he said, "Yeah, that's correct, what's it to you?" And their remarks to him were, or warnings of threat were, that you better tell your minister, your brother, that he better back off in the forestry policy issues, otherwise you and your family are as good as dead.
Across the South Pacific today, the news media are under siege as never before. In some countries, journalists face brutal assaults, arbitrary imprisonment, gaggings, threats, defamation cases with the threat of bankruptcy and vilification. And they also face mounting pressure from governments to be accountable and to report the truth. But the issue is whose truth and accountability to whom. As Pacific journalists and news media become more professional and probing on the dilemmas of development, economic and social policy and issues such as corruption, there is a danger that some politicians want to restrict the media from meeting the public interest. Papua New Guinea is now facing pressure on the news media that is typical of harassment in the Asia-Pacific region in recent years. Sometimes the pressure is direct, other times it takes legal forms. Often the media have been the only voice questioning government abuses, such as in New Caledonia.
Bonjour monsieur. Monsieur, bonjour. À une télévision australienne. Oui. On peut vous demander qu'est-ce que vous êtes venu faire ici?
Tout ce que je peux vous répondre, c'est que nous pensions que vous étiez que ces gens-là étaient sur la chaussée, tout simplement.
Et là, qu'est-ce que vous pensez que ça va se passer, là?
Bah, je pense que ça va rester dans le calme, tout simplement. Sans plus. Je vous demanderai, s'il vous plaît, monsieur, d'arrêter votre filmage, n'est-ce pas?
He's asking us to stop filming.
Ah, right. Merci. Ça suffit.
Yep. Why, they ask, are the Indonesians invading us? Why, they ask?
Sometimes the repression comes in the form of the murder of journalists bearing witness. In October 1975, 5 Australian journalists were killed in the village of Balibo while covering the Indonesian invasion of East Timor. This is the last report by reporter Greg Shackleton, sent the day before he and his colleagues were murdered by Indonesian soldiers.
We look like being the last people left in the town. In the meantime, we've daubed our house with the word Australia in red and the Australian flag. We're hoping it will afford us some protection.
I don't know whether it happened to Greg or which of the 5, but the majority of them were hung up by their feet. Their sexual organs were removed and pushed into their mouths. They were stabbed with the short throwing knives that the Indonesian soldiers carry. And it isn't known whether they asphyxiated or whether they bled to death or whether some of them got stabbed in the heart and died quickly. The feeling was that because this is quite a common way to punish people in East Timor, bodies are often found this way. And so the Timorese have a fair idea that it takes a long time. They asphyxiate usually.
Did the Australian government ever protest to the Indonesian government for the deaths of
they claim they
Greg
did.
and his companions?
They claim that they asked.
Publicly protest?
No, they asked diplomatic questions, which allowed them to get diplomatic answers.
Citizens and peoples of Fiji, as you may have probably heard, or no. The Royal Fiji Military Forces have today, at 4 p.m., reasserted its authority over the government of Fiji.
In Fiji, during 1987, when Colonel Sitiveni Rimbuka staged 2 military coups, troops entered news media offices, some journalists were arrested and assaulted, and newspapers were forced to publish under a self-censorship regime. One daily newspaper, the Fiji Sun, refused to publish under such oppression and closed. Every year, World Press Freedom Day is celebrated to honour and acknowledge journalists who have been executed, murdered, assaulted, harassed or imprisoned while doing their duty to inform the people. It is also celebrated in the Pacific.
Today, the world over, journalists pause to remember colleagues now in prison for stories they had written which may have been unpopular with the respective governments.
It's always a fragile thing, and what a lot of people forget is that the journalists are only the messengers, and it's a basic pillar of democracy to have freedom of the press. It goes along hand in hand with having democratic processes.
And while the freedom of the press is contained in the Constitution, it has recently come under the microscope of the government, which asks for media organizations to be more accountable in their reporting.
What I would rather like to see is consultative investigation involving parties involved before the press or the newsmen or the media can come out with to put things in either in a newspaper or on TV or anything of that matter.
At the end of 1996, 3 tough draft news media laws were introduced into Parliament in Papua New Guinea. They were the News Media Commission Bill, National Communication and Information Bill, and Freedom of Information Bill, which many believe will lead to jailings of journalists, or at least exclusion of reporters who don't toe the government line.
The media in Papua New Guinea is going through a very difficult time right now. Because somehow our elected leaders feel that we have too much power, and through some alerts that we are misusing our power and responsibility to the public, and therefore they want to bring the press under close scrutiny by the government. I think freedom of the media in Papua New Guinea is at a crossroad, and only the elected leaders will decide which way we go. I'm very concerned about it, and so are a lot of my colleagues, because media controlled by the government will mean people will not be free to express their views on issues and matters that affect them.
We have taken our good fortune in enjoying a free an open press for so long that there are some things which we should safeguard against. We have not really tried to tackle. With the freedom of expression, the media is not enshrined in our Constitution. That we have just come to accept that as a part of the life of the media in PNG.